Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl from Talk Your Heart Out, also known as TYHO. This evening, I'm joined by my colleague Gauri and TYHO therapist Sweedy, who will lead today's session. To those who have attended our past few webinars, thank you for joining us again. To those who are new here, let me start off with a quick introduction. Talk Your Heart Out is an end-to-end therapy platform that provides accessible, convenient, and quality mental health support. These AMAs that we run are meant to provide you with a chance to learn more about mental health issues and speak with a therapist outside of a session. Today, we'll be delving deeper into the depths of imposter syndrome. So I have a few points to highlight before we start. The session will begin with a presentation by Sweedy, followed by a Q&A segment. We will also be doing a short audience interaction later on Mentimeter. So do keep your mobile phones on standby or open a separate browser on your laptops. To post your questions, you can also click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen anytime. Feel free to do this anonymously. You can also use the chat button to interact with one another or send us a message if you're facing technical issues. Lastly, at the end of the session, we'll be sharing a feedback form with you. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce Sweedy, our speaker for today. Sweedy has 5 years of clinical experience working with a variety of clients, from children to adults, couples to families. She provides support for many issues such as anxiety, depression, work-related stress, as well as family and familial issues. On that note, some of the therapeutic approaches Sweedy employs are cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as acceptance and commitment therapy. Lastly, Sweedy is also a working mother of 2 young children. All right, that's all from me, and I'll now pass the time on to her.
All right, thanks Cheryl for the nice intro. Hello everybody, thanks for making time to be here tonight, and I hope that we'll have a good time together, learning together and having a good time of sharing and discussion together as well. So I'm Sweedy. Today we'll be looking into imposter syndrome, exploring exactly what imposter syndrome is, some of its signs and triggers, and finally some ways to help us cope with imposter syndrome. Okay, so before we move into it, I thought just gather some understanding of what we think imposter syndrome is. So take some time, scan the QR code, or you can click. I don't think you can click, but you can type the Mentimeter link. Put in your thoughts, your keywords, your thoughts about what exactly is imposter syndrome to you. Oh, nice. We're having all the results coming in. Yeah, fake is quite big. Oh. Yeah, bit about doubt. I see wearing a mask too. Yeah, some sense of insecurity, not qualified, inferior, inadequacy. Yeah, there's kind of few words coming up. Okay, we give it a while more, maybe another. Oh, okay, I think we have about 27, 28. Okay. All right, so a big part, right? Fake is very big, doubt is very big, inferior, and actually there's a bit of inadequacy that is coming out in different words, but it's coming out a few times as well, right? People pleasing, depression, insecurity, right? And I think you guys roughly have the picture, right? Gauri, maybe we move on. And indeed, imposter syndrome, right? As it sounds, right? What exactly is imposter syndrome, right? And imposter syndrome was first actually coined by 2 researchers, right? Pauline Chance and Suzanne Imes, and they were from Georgia State University doing their research in 1978, realizing and noticing that high achieving individuals, right, at that time, particularly women in their study, they actually sensed that they couldn't live up to other people's expectations, right? So we saw some about people pleasing and expectations just now. And instead of seeing their failures and mistakes as performance feedback, they actually deeply personalize all these feedback that were given to them. And at the end of the day, even when there were successes, these successes are often attributed to luck, timing, any other factors, even like the stars aligned, right? But just not their own experience, skills, or qualities. Okay, so what exactly is imposter syndrome then, right? We are looking at basically three areas, right? One is the perception of feeling of fraudulence, right? Where the person thinks that I am a fraud or an imposter. Okay, and they generally struggle to internalize success, meaning anything that is anything that they have achieved, any successes that has been achieved, has been attributed to external factors, like we talked about just now, right? And the third part is often having that fear or struggle of being discovered by others as being phony, or basically being a fraud or not being good enough in the eyes of others. So some of us might wonder, right, how prevalent is imposter syndrome itself, right? So a study by Gravois in 2007, they found that about 70% of people actually do experience it once in their lifetime. And I was just sharing with Gauri and Cheryl when I had the testing, right, of the session, that when I was asked to do this, I was a little bit like, am I going to be able to do well enough for the participants to learn something good enough for them? Will it be a session where I provide correct information? What if I give wrong information, right? Yeah. And I think we all actually mostly do go through such moments, right? Yeah, and indeed, it's found to be relatively common among high achieving individuals, especially, right? Professionals, academics, students, even people like us, right? But of course, the intensity and frequency of these feelings is different from person to person. Okay. So what kind of impact does imposter syndrome have on people? And we are looking at mainly two areas, right? Emotional well-being and performance. So for emotional well-being, studies have actually found that some common impacts are things like burnout, anxiety, depression, right? And remember, someone who struggles with imposter syndrome tends to fear that they're not good enough, right? Being discovered as being a fraud or phony in that sense. And so more often than not, there's a lot of anxiety about being discovered or not being good enough in that sense. Then on top of that, the person will then try to overcompensate, right? I work very hard, I'm going to put in extra effort. And so end up, the person can get burnout, right? Because of the extra miles, extra effort that they have to put in. Sometimes, despite all the trying and the hard work, the person still feel like they're not good enough, right? And when they do meet with failures, it can also lead to depression and which is not an uncommon impact. Okay, so another one that we're looking at is performance impact, right? So the person may be experiencing dissatisfaction with his or her performance because he's not meeting his or her high expectations. And the keyword here is, of course, high expectations, right? It may not be perfect enough to them. And with the fears of not being able to do well enough, or even the fears of failure, they may end up being stifled in taking risks, right? Or even in their own creativity. So at the end of the day, these people might actually end up avoiding responsibilities or opportunities for growth in that sense. Okay. So some signs of imposter syndrome, like, how would I know if I might be possibly experiencing imposter syndrome, right? We have talked about quite a few so far, one of which is self-doubt, right? That fear of being found out, the fear of failure, right? One of the more obvious or more common one is that sense of attributing your successes to external factors, right? As we mentioned just now. And people who struggle with imposter syndrome tend to have that kind of sensitivity to criticism, even though it might be constructive feedback, actually, which we very often have in things like performance reviews, right? Exam grades and things like that. So they do struggle with that. And also there's the need to be perfect, the very best, right? In the struggle with imposter syndrome itself. Okay. And what we wonder, what are some of the triggers in imposter syndrome, right? So what research has kind of shown for early life experiences, right? Some factors that contribute can be things like family dynamics, right? And in family dynamics, we're talking about how someone view their talents as atypical from their family members, right? Like talk about artistic person in a family of very scientific people, for example. Then the artistic person might be like, yeah, I'm not good enough because they are so good with their science and I'm here, struggling with my science, right? The other one can be how the family actually conveys importance of intellectual abilities in the family, right? And also how, it's actually success is actually something easy. You don't need much effort. Then that person naturally will feel like, how come I'm struggling so hard, right? Then how family attribute one's success to external factors, right? If, for example, a child who does well on exams and then they're like, oh, it's just because this time around it's easy, for example, right? Then they start to internalize these things and then recognize that, oh, maybe it's because of all these external factors that I did well. It's not because of myself, right? And another one is the lack of positive reinforcement in the family itself, right? So these are early life experiences or, as they're growing up. Criticism and comparison is also something that is very common as a trigger, right? Oops, sorry. And people who struggle with imposter syndrome often are very sensitive to criticisms, even if they are constructive feedback, as we mentioned just now. Okay. One very common trigger, right, where that imposter syndrome does come in is when there are new opportunities or even like new roles, right, promotions, growth opportunities, and this is where it can leave the person feeling concerned about his or her ability to do well. And again, then they might think that they are flawed or not good enough, and some might even just reject, right? And finally, some research actually found relationship also between personality factors and imposter syndrome. Neuroticism, okay, that is one of big five personality traits, right? It's typically defined as a tendency towards anxiety, depression, self-doubt, and other negative feelings. So someone who scores high on neuroticism often worries about things, easily irritated, have frequent mood swings, often feel blue. And we can see how that's possible, right? For people high on the scale of the neuroticism, to be prone to struggle with imposter syndrome, since they're likely to often feel like they are not good enough, they're worrying that people might discover them as flawed, right? And quite straightforward is the sense of perfectionism, right? People who are highly perfectionistic, understandably, are prone to imposter syndrome as well, because they hold themselves to very high standards, which often are impossible to meet. Okay. So how on earth can I cope with imposter syndrome, we wonder, right? Since so many of us can possibly experience it, right? As we can recognize by now, imposter syndrome largely is a struggle with perception, right? How we perceive others, how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive the situation of the world in that sense. And these thoughts that run through our mind about our capabilities and how others might see us as a fraud is basically the main struggle. And also when successes experience, the tendency to attribute all these external factors and inability to attribute all these factors external and inability to actually attribute it to ourselves is also part of the struggle, right? So it's very important for us to learn how to observe our own thoughts, right? When we talk about observing our own thoughts, we are looking at learning to pay attention to your own self-talk, right? Especially those critical ones, right? How are you perceiving the situation? How are you looking at yourself? How are you thinking about what others are thinking of you or saying of you, right? It's also important to help yourself recognize that perfection is unrealistic and costly, right? It is mostly impossible to achieve perfection, honestly speaking. And I'm also talking about myself, right? Sometimes I do think that what I did is not good enough. It can be better, right? When I'm seeing clients, I think I could have done this in a different way, that, I could have asked a certain question that can have made the client think in another way that might have been more helpful. But the truth is, we all try our best at that moment, right? And at that moment, that is already the best, right? So the point here is, I do have such struggles too, but right, if I do allow it to tear me down, right, I keep thinking that, wow, you see lah, I never asked this question, I've been such a terrible therapist, I'm not perfect enough, right? Then it's going to be a journey of downhill, right? It's going to be a journey of worrying, anxiety, anxious feelings, feeling lousy all the time. So instead, it's more important for us to recognize that failures are actually part and parcel of life, right? And we can not always be the best at perfection at all times, right? But at the same time, if we do re-look at it again, right? All these failures, all these things that we can't achieve at this point, if we see them as room for learning and growth, right? Instead of seeing ourselves as failures, I think that helps us a lot more in our journey ahead, right? You feel better, you are more motivated, right? So that's important, right? Perfection is unrealistic, it is costly. And what's perhaps helpful to then ask ourselves instead of perfection is just, what success looks like for you, right? And the truth is, in every season of our life, as a student, as a husband or a wife, as a teacher, as a counselor, as a daughter, as a parent, right? Our different seasons of life require us to be doing different things, right? Success will look then different, right? If we do pin our success only to one thing all our life, then I think that might be difficult, right? Because at different times of our life, we should be trying to work on different things, right? Growing in different things. So our version of successes can and should change along the way as well. Okay. So in coping with imposter syndrome, what's also important, right? Other than looking at our own faults, it's also learning to love yourself and have self-compassion, right? It's important for you to know your own worth. We are all worth it, right? And one way to recognize that we are worth as a person, we are worthy as a person, is recognizing your own strengths, right? Remember, in imposter syndrome, it's hard for someone who struggles with imposter syndrome to think that they are good, to think that they are qualified, right? They often externalize, right? So learning to recognize your strengths and things that you're good at, making a list, writing it down, be proud of it and say, hey, well done, right? This is what I'm good at. That's going to help you combat the imposter syndrome, right? Learning to embrace moments of success instead of frequently externalizing your successes is also very important, right? Like I said just now, always tell yourself, ask yourself, what have you learned? What have you achieved? What have you done well recently? And then when you recognize that, say, hey, I did well, right? And one killer of ability to self-love and self-compassion, right, is actually comparison with others, right? So it's gonna be hard to tell yourself, oh, you well done, right? When you look at the social media and you go like, oh wow, this person has got such a happy family. Look, they're all smiles and they are always posting happy things, right? And you scroll on your what's that called, Instagram, right? And then you go like, oh wow, this person just got promotion. Oh, you bought a big car. Oh, they bought a big house or condo, right? And all these successes that you see in people's life, and you go like, oh no, I don't have all these things. Am I not good enough, right? And indeed, these are killers, right? The reason why I say killers is because once we start comparing, then we forget that actually every person is unique, right? And we all progress at our own pace and time. We need to recognize that. And if we don't, then that's where the struggle will come, right? So try your best not to compare yourself with others, but remind yourself you are on your own journey. And so when you recognize your own successes, right? remember to encourage, affirm yourself, right, on that journey. And of course, mistakes and failures are definitely part and parcel of life, something that we can, I honestly don't think we can avoid, right? But it is in our mistakes that and failures that we can learn to do things differently and improve ourselves. So let's be ready to forgive ourselves, pick ourselves up, and learn to grow and become better versions of ourselves through the mistakes that we make. Okay, and last but not least, the power of support and the people around us. Right, the first two are mainly focused on how we can do things for ourselves to help us to combat imposter syndrome. Right, this one is as in seeking support, right, is basically important because we then allow the people around us, and which is community as well, right, to help us through the difficult times. Sorry. Okay, so loved ones, we are talking about people like family members, friends, mentors, right? People that you trust and respect. And they are the ones who can help you to separate what's real from your perceptions of insecurity, especially, right? If you go to someone who is you're close with, share with them, hey, I've been feeling like that, right? I don't feel so good about what's happening. I think I'm not doing well enough. I think there's so much there's so much I'm missing, and things like that. And people who trust you and know you well enough will be able to sit you down and, hey, actually, look, this is not very accurate, right? You have certain achievements, you have done well, you are growing, and these are the people who can challenge what you're thinking, right? And the perceptions of your insecurities in that sense. They'll also be helpful to engage professionals like counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists, and you name it, right? Who can help you with to navigate difficult feelings when the feelings are even more intense, right? We talk about anxieties, we talk about depression, we talk about the fears and deep-seated insecurities even, right? And eventually be able to work out some coping strategies, how to manage with all these professionals as well. And one of my favorites, right? Self-help and interest groups. And I feel that it's always amazing to connect with these group of people because it's always it's a space where like-minded people, right? People who think alike, people who have similar experience come together. And then this is where you can know that, hey, actually, I'm not alone, right? There are people out there who are struggling with the same struggles, who are experiencing the same things, right? And on top of that, you can, or other than just receiving the support, you can also be providing the support and encouragement for each other on that journey. Yeah. So I've come to an end of my sharing. I will hand it over to Cheryl. Hope that it was a helpful time for you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sweedy, for the presentation. Before we start the Q&A segment, please give me a minute to go through our 3 ground rules. The first is to respect the floor, where we listen when others are speaking or sharing, even if we may be in disagreement. The second is to keep an open mind and welcome the different perspectives shared. The last is to stay on point. Let's pose questions that are relevant to the topic, especially in the interest of time. Also, just to reiterate, you can send your questions in anonymously via the Q&A button. But if you prefer to speak up later, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Please note that we might address you by the name you have indicated in this case. Okay, that's all I have. Feel free to send your questions in. Okay, so we will give it a minute or two to have all the questions up. Okay, I see some questions coming in. This is how the first one goes, really. I think I have imposter syndrome, but it seems to motivate me and push me to improve myself further. Can imposter syndrome be beneficial?
Okay, thanks for that question. And I think that's something that is on actually most of our minds, right? So we've been talking about imposter syndrome. And I think, yes, definitely, right? As we remember from the sharing just now, someone with imposter syndrome basically struggles with that feeling of not being good enough. We also remember that at the end of the day, it's about perception, right? So if we are able to work on how we manage the perception of the situation, that will help us to see that we are probably in a space of learning and growing, right? Instead of just focusing on the failures, on the things that we are not achieving through our standards, right? And when we can see that we are learning and growing instead of seeing ourselves as failure, then we can motivate ourselves, right? And when we set standards that are more realistic, then as we achieve them, it becomes more motivating to actually go on and do more things. Yeah, so ability to see all these struggles as growth and space for learning, I think that helps.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective. Because if we remember from the workshop earlier, most people, when they think of imposter syndrome, things that come up are quite negative, right? We have things like fake, people pleasing, and maybe feelings of inadequacy. So I guess that the term itself, imposter syndrome, carries quite a bit of negative connotation, which is why people always assume for it to be something that's not so good for ourselves, especially if we're going through it. Yeah, but I think your perspective actually gives it a more balanced view, in that, it all boils down to how we perceive these feelings and manage them eventually. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next question. This is how it goes. Can imposter syndrome be completely eliminated, or is it more about managing and minimizing its impact?
Okay, so imposter syndrome, again, I think it's perception, right? So we talk about eliminated versus coping or minimizing impact. And in fact, it's like how we view it, right? Someone who can cope with the symptoms or basically the struggles with imposter syndrome may actually think that, yeah, okay, I think I am okay with imposter syndrome, right? I do struggle, but I can cope, right? Whereas someone else who can manage might think that, oh, okay, if I can manage, then I've eliminated it lah, right? In that sense. So I think at the end of the day, it's also about how you look at it lah, right? So my answer, I don't think it can be eliminated or that it can't be minimized or managed, right? But we think about things like anger management, for example, right? Anger is something that we all experience. And when it goes out of hand, that's where we need to learn how to manage and cope with it, right? But does anger go away? I don't think it goes away. We do still experience it, right? But because I know how to manage it better, I know how to work around it, then it is something that I can still live with lah, right? It's something that is overcome as well in a sense. So yeah, whether it's eliminated or whether we're talking about minimizing impact, I would say it's similar things lah. Right? What's important is learning how to the skills and the tools to cope lah.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I think the anger management example is quite helpful because we tend to want to get rid of something we think is bad. Like, for example, I want imposter syndrome to be eliminated completely. And that may not be possible because of our different circumstances and all that. It may, recur when we move to another stage in our lives, per se. Yeah, so I guess it's true that we should not be so concerned about eliminating it completely, but at least having confidence that we are able to manage it whenever it comes up again. Okay, so we have an attendee who is also asked, what are some practices that I can follow when I catch myself feeling symptoms of imposter syndrome?
Okay, so I think it depends on what exactly are you feeling, right? So like we shared just now, some of the signs and some of the triggers as well, right, that you experience. And at the end of the day, we also talked about how we can help ourselves to cope, right? So again, I'm going to bring in the fact that imposter syndrome is a lot about how you perceive things, right? So if we can work on that perception, right, once you catch yourself recognizing seeing that you have certain kind of perceptions that is either very perfectionistic, you really need to do this in a certain way, and if you don't, then you're gonna fail. Or if you think that hey, maybe I'm not good enough, right? Like me, right, when I was struggling with trying to come up with this webinar, right? then that's where you learn to manage it, right? And we talked about number one, learning to manage the thoughts, right? How you actually can look at it and tell yourself and try to rethink and relook at the situation. Help yourself think again. Okay, is it true that I'm not good enough, right? Actually, I have strengths, right? How can I bring my strengths then into what I'm doing, right? I have the knowledge. How can I bring the knowledge into what I'm doing, for example, right? And then looking at your past successes, right? And then also being able to come to a space of recognizing that actually you can do what you can, and perhaps you may not meet 100% standard, right? But you will be able to do good enough for as far as you know. And I think leave space and for mistakes, right? We all make mistakes, and allow yourself to grow from there lah. Yeah, so I think that's my take on that.
All right, thank you for sharing that, Sweetie. I think that's a few different steps that the individual can try. And just now you were mentioning that, it depends on the situation that they're in as well as the symptoms that they experience. So right now we actually have some participants who actually gave us a more clear situation that they are facing. And then maybe you can provide some steps as to how they can deal with it, or to at least alleviate some difficult feelings that they're feeling. Yeah. So this is how the situation goes. When I struggle with imposter syndrome, I give up so easily. I'm so quick to stop, throw away, or delete whatever I'm working on because I feel like I'm not good enough and I am a fraud. How can I prevent myself from quitting so easily? Because in the long term, I feel that this harms my opportunities.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that must not be easy, right? I think we all come to a space where we are trying our best, but having to recognize and think that what you're doing is not good enough, I think that sucks, right? And having to even throw away what you have done, yeah, I think that's really, really tough. But if you ask me, I think, yeah, at the end of the day, we need to again come to a space, right, of recognizing that we are doing our best, right? So for you, whoever you are, right, if you struggle to recognize that you're doing your best, I think that might be the first space to start, right? First space to start, that you are giving what you can in this situation, right? If you are looking at what you're doing, right, and you are giving 90, 100% of what you already can, that is already your best. And recognizing that again, right, back to the perception thing, that at the end of the day, imposter syndrome, at the end of the day, thinking that you're good enough, not good enough, is actually a lot about your own perception of yourself, right? Then being able to slowly step out of that is one important thing, right? So I'm going to go back a little bit more into our coping method again, where we talked about being able to recognize your own critical thoughts, right? Why do you think you're not good enough, right? Again, instead of thinking you're good and not good enough, maybe look at what you have achieved so far. What have you been able to do well, right? What have you been trained in for today, to be able to produce what you're producing? What are the strengths that you have that you can actually bring into what you're doing at this moment? A lot of perception, right? A lot of trying to rethink and relook at the situation again. Then I think that's where it starts. Of course, it's not going to be overnight, right? Like, if I think like that, then it's going to be helpful immediately. But as you start to slowly change that kind of thinking, that you're not good enough, what you are doing is actually lousy, and you want to give up, then it's going to be hard, right? But if you start small, right, each time tell yourself, okay, I'm going to try, and I'm going to try and give my best. But if there are feedback that comes back that this is not good enough, okay, then I'll take it in my stride and learn that, okay, these are feedback given to me and I'm going to take it constructively. Let me try and just improve, right? Yeah, sometimes it's also coming to a space of thinking, hey, actually, what's the worst that can happen if I do my best and then there are still things to improve on? Most of the time, it's not that bad. most of the time, there is space for us to learn and grow and become even better than where we are. Yeah, so I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think as I was reading the question, I thought it was a really difficult feeling to process because not only are you spending time on getting the task done, the fact that you end up like ruining it, deleting it, or throwing it away diminishes the effort that you put in. It's not that your work is just not good enough, but you also diminish like that time and effort that you spent in doing it, right? And I think on your point about how as long as we give our best, that should be enough. I just want to say this cliche line, right? That everyone's best doesn't look the same every day. So maybe today that best is 30% for this individual. So why not just do that 30% and come back to it another day? Yeah, so who knows, you might see things differently at a different time and place in your life. Yeah. Okay, so we have another situation that is a little bit more severe. So now this is the question. What happens if you are completely paralyzed by imposter syndrome to the point that you're unable to leave your house or go to your exams or work, etc.?
Wow, this sounds like really very intense situation going on there. And I'm wondering what is the thing that is paralyzing the person, right? If I can imagine, I mean, since it was not, but if feel free if the person wants to tell us exactly what is the paralyzing factor, or what's going on when you don't want to leave, help yourself. I mean, feel free to actually just let us know. But I'm imagining intense fear. I'm imagining intense anxiety, right? Of not being able to do well enough lah. Yeah. I mean, on top of what we have already talked about, right? About because I feel like I'm broken recording. I'm gonna say the same thing, right? We're gonna have to work on the perception, and we're gonna have to work on the ability to let yourself make mistakes and learn and grow from there. But I might also say that it is real that sometimes these feelings of anxiety and even depression can be quite crippling, right? And this is probably times where even family members and friends may not know exactly how to help as well. And I might say it is important to then also consider seeking professional help. Yeah, because if what deems the importance of seeking professional help, I would say, is when you feel that when you come to a point that you think you cannot function normally daily, right? Like, for example, going to school, going to places, right? Leaving your house. These are things that by right we should be able to normally do, right? But when you find that you can't manage even your daily functioning, then that's where it's concerning, and you probably should seek professional help lah. Yeah. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Sweetie. I thought, I would just pick the question out so that we can actually see and explore the varying intensities that people undergo imposter syndrome, right? Because sometimes it can be like a passing feeling of feeling like a fraud and things like that, whereas some other times it can really paralyze us, just like what this person shared. And of course, I hope that, with whatever you say, they might be prompted to take the first move to seek some help. Yeah. Because sometimes you do not have to endure it alone, and you may not be in the state to endure it alone, right? Okay, so maybe let's move on to a little bit where imposter syndrome deals a bit with other people. Because previously we talked about the person experiencing situations or trying to minimize the impacts, right? Okay, so this is a slightly longer question. I'll just lay out the scenario first, and you can let me know if you need me to repeat it. Okay, so here is how it goes. Hi, I would like to ask, does gaslighting contribute to imposter syndrome? Sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between authentic feedback and feedback given with malicious intention to keep one's self-confidence low. So that it's easy for that person to be manipulated, especially in the workplace. So overall, the question is, does gaslighting contribute to imposter syndrome?
That's an interesting question. Well, if we look at gaslighting and feedback from people, right? It's true that sometimes it's hard to discern whether it's the person is blaming you, or really is constructive lah, right? But yes, gaslighting can actually exude certain levels of anxiousness, right? Feelings of anxiousness, which can then make you feel like you are not good enough. You are struggling with a certain standard that you cannot meet, right? I can imagine these things in my mind. For example, at a workplace, if a boss constantly tells you that your job is not properly done, you're not good enough. I mean, I don't know the exact scenario, right? But if I were to paint a scenario, for example, if it's at a workplace, right? Personally, I might just try and understand the situation, at least make the effort for myself, right? To go talk to the boss, find out exactly what's going wrong. How can I really improve if the person wants me to improve, right? So finding out very clear objectives and factors that needs certain work or improvement, and then do it. But if every time it happens and it's still not good enough, then I might question, right? And I might consider maybe there is something wrong with what's going on. Yeah, then I think at the end of the day, then it is back to yourself, right? Recognizing for yourself whether you have done your best, right? And if you have done your best, then I think there's nothing to be sorry for. And if there's a need, then perhaps you might need to change your environment, for example, if you can manage that, or you can explore something else. Yeah, so I think personally, if you ask me, yes, gaslighting can possibly lead to imposter syndrome. But I think, again, there is ways to cope with it. And it's how we look at it, it's how we respond to it. And be able to work around it.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I would like to also add a bit on how I really like the point about how you said we should actually clarify on the feedback that's being given. Because sometimes especially when it's presented as gaslighting, right, it could be very vague and more about like your personality and all that, rather than the work that you do when it becomes then constructive feedback, right? Because if it's specific enough for you to know, what you should work on, how you can improve, then yes, it's valid, right? But if it's just something about your personality or something they don't like about you, then we don't actually have to acknowledge it. Yeah. Okay, so another question that we have is, if parents are a huge reason why we develop imposter syndrome, especially for students taking national exams, how can our parents that they need to improve on the way they speak to children who are already predisposed to imposter syndrome feelings?
Sorry, Cheryl, you were cut off a little bit just now. Do you mind
Okay.
repeating the question for me?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, so this is how it goes. If parents are a huge reason why we develop imposter syndrome, especially for students taking national exams, how can we tell parents that they need to improve on the way they speak to their children who are already predisposed to imposter syndrome feelings?
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah, maybe let's break it up. Let's break it up first. So essentially the attendee is saying that parents can be a huge reason why children develop imposter syndrome, because they are already taking national exams, which can be a huge toll, right, on them mentally, physically, and all that. Yeah, so firstly, how can you tell parents they need to improve on the way they speak to their children? And secondly, the fact that the children is already predisposed to having these difficult feelings.
Okay. Okay, so depending on how we are approaching this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, give me a minute. Let me pull up my slides again. Okay, so depending on how we are approaching this, right? If it's from the student's point of view, like how can I talk to the parents and expect them to change? That might be a little bit difficult, right? So I would say that I would usually work with my clients as well, and we focus on the circle of control, right? So we talk about circle of control, we talk about what is within what we can do, right? So if asking from a person, from a student point of view, trying to want to tell the parents and help them change, that is kind of outside of the circle of control, because we can't quite change how parents think or do things unless they willingly decide that they want to change. Okay, so then maybe they would have approached somebody like a family member or a helper, someone in a helping profession to figure out how they can change their ways of speaking with a child, encouraging a child, or in a sense, preventing as much as they can. Then again, any family and we all kind of know that no one is perfect, right? So any parent at the end of the day can still be doing something that can possibly hurt the child in that sense, and still breed a little kind of space for this kind of anxiety or struggles or struggles with imposter syndrome, right? Okay, so I hope that answers the question from the student approaching parent point of view. Okay, so in professional approaching parents who are keen to want to do something about helping their children in this area, or even providing a space that is as helpful as possible to not trigger that kind of imposter syndrome in children, right? So just now when we were sharing, there were kind of 4 areas that we looked at, right? One is the kind of talents or strengths in the family where the child might feel that they are atypical, right? Then as parents, the role of parents perhaps is then to still recognize that each child, each person is unique, right? And be able to affirm that, be able to even, if possibly, tap on their strengths, right? In things at home, in helping out at home, in planning things, like let's say you have a planner and you have an executor, right? And then, okay, let's plan a school holiday together, right? Okay, you do the planning, then you do the execution, do the booking and things like that. And then they start to recognize that they have strengths in different areas as well, right? So that's one kind of, one way lah. The other thing that is also important is how families actually communicate, right? The importance of intellectual abilities. Is it just intellectual strength that's important, right? We learn about other forms of strengths, right? Artistic strengths, musical strengths, visual spatial strengths, physical strengths, right? That a person can have. So if a family is overly focused on intellectual abilities, then naturally, if the child's strength is not there, then there can be that kind of development in terms of imposter syndrome. And also the importance of just sharing and reminding them that failures are okay, but at the same time, successes requires effort, right? It's not that, wow, just like that, success is here, right? It's not that the stars align and your success happens, right? And also that's also part of the attribution of their success. When a child attains a certain kind of success in a family, to be able to attribute that to their effort, attribute that to their strength, instead of telling them that, oh yeah, maybe this time around the exam was easy, right? Or maybe because of the bell curve, right? That's why you could do well, right? Yeah, things like that. And finally, I would say positive reinforcement. As they achieve what they achieve, affirm them, reward them, celebrate it with them, right? Yeah, so this is from point of view of professional sharing this with parents to help them build a family environment that is helpful. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much for tackling the different points of view, from how a child would actually approach a parent, and then about how you as a professional would give tips in terms of how a parent can deal with it if their children is going through a difficult time. So in that slant, we also have a couple of questions that revolve around helping others out. So this is how a question goes. How can we support someone else who has reached out to us with imposter syndrome?
Okay, so I think just now I did briefly mention that, right? Firstly, once you recognize, how do we first even recognize someone who has imposter syndrome? Is that often they are probably, putting themselves down, thinking that they can't achieve or are not good enough for whatever is presented to them as an opportunity, right? Or even really crippled lah, by how they are struggling, right? So within your means, as a family member, as a friend, as a mentor, is actually to encourage them, right? Encourage them in the sense that that they are you encourage them in the sense that in the area where you see their strengths, in the area where you have seen their achievements, right? Remind them that they are doing great, right, in the way that they are doing, and this might be a new situation. Reminding them that failures are normal. Let's try again, right, and do better the next round. I was just thinking about my own experience as well, right? That when I was struggling with this producing this webinar, not producing, understand, like doing this, taking up this webinar itself, I was talking to a few friends, right? And I went like, I think I shouldn't take it up. I don't think I can do a good job, right? Because Q&A like so long, no. How to answer all the questions? Later I give wrong answer, how, right? Yeah, and it was my friends, especially my classmates in my university where I did my master's with, right? That came to me and, hey, you have done workshops, you have done these kind of events before, right? And you have been trained with the knowledge and all. Sure, you can't do it perfectly, but you are good enough, right? And it is a good option, a good avenue to try and grow and learn as well. And that's where I went like, yeah, that's true, right? I shouldn't just because I think that maybe I can't do the Q&A part, then skip out on the whole opportunity to learn and grow. And I really am glad to be here, right? Because I think I've really learned and grown so much through the questions, through the sharing as well. Yeah, so I think as friends and family, that is our limits lah. Okay, I say limits because, like we heard just now, right? There are times where the intensity becomes so great, that the person is really struggling so much mentally, emotionally, that they can't even function normally. Then as family and friends, this is when we also encourage them that, hey, this is where I can encourage you up to, but I really hope that maybe you want to consider seeing a professional and help them to not feel that seeing a professional means they're problematic or that it is something that's shameful. But remind them that it is just also part of a journey of growth, lah, right? We are struggling with something. We have something is affecting us at this moment, but we're just going to learn and grow tools as to how to overcome this, how to actually cope with what we're struggling with, so that you can move on in the journey ahead and become even better. Yeah. So that hope that answers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sweety, for sharing your personal experience. I was reflecting on what you shared, and I find that your friends actually demonstrated what it is like to gently sort of challenge your negative thoughts or your insecurities and things like that. So they were giving you instances of where you've succeeded and your professional skills, right? You actually have a master's degree and all that. It's not that you're just coming to take on this webinar opportunity out of the blue and things like that. Yeah, so I think that's one way that we can practice. We can first listen to our friend or even a loved one who has shared with us about feeling imposter feelings, right? Going through like negative thoughts and things like that. And then thereafter, try to gently challenge them. And as you say, let them know that there's a certain limit as to how much you can provide reassurance. If they need the extra help, then they can seek it where they find the time to do so and, when they are ready to do so. Yeah. So maybe one last question to close our webinar today. This one is slightly more uplifting. It goes like this. How can we practice more self-compassion?
Ooh, nice question. Okay, so self-compassion basically starts at the point where you learn to recognize for yourself that firstly, there are times where you might fail, right? There are times that you are going to make mistakes, right? And I think it's very common for us to think that, wow, mistakes is a big thing, right? Some even like, wow, the end of the world. Yeah. But approaching mistakes and failures in a way to see that yeah, okay, I am not perfect. That's one, right? That's already one form of self-compassion, recognizing that we are all not perfect, but we are all learning, growing, trying our best kind of beings, right? And accepting that, right? It's already important, right? So once we're able to accept that, and when we do face difficult situations, when we do face failures or mistakes, then that's where we can tell ourselves, okay, yes, I've made a mistake and I acknowledge that it's my mistake, but it doesn't make me less of a person, right? It doesn't make me lousier as a person. In fact, if I am able to recognize my mistakes and able to actually work and grow on them, I become better, right? So that's one thing that I always tell myself as well. Yeah, mistakes and recognizing that it is actually avenues for growth instead of something for us to condemn ourselves for lah. Yeah, and honestly, I think self-compassion is also recognizing we are who we are. In my own opinion, recognizing we are who we are on our own journeys. Yeah, and that's why I think it's really, really very important and that we mentioned just now in the sharing as well, that we should stop and try our best to limit self-comparisons. Yeah, I think personally that is something that is really, really big. Because comparisons really throw us in the space of looking at others and thinking they are better, we are lousier, we are not doing good enough, and there will not be a space where you can actually be compassionate to yourself, right? And that's really, really, really a struggle for me lah. Yeah, and I think that's I think really important. Yeah, and at the end of the day, being able to celebrate your own successes, right? Being able to look at yourself and say that, hey, I did well, right? I'm worth it. I'm able to succeed in these moments because of who I am. That's also learning to love and being compassionate to yourself lah. Yeah. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much for ending this on like a lighter and brighter note, because I really like what you said about how we are all on our own journeys. Because really, like, if we go at our own pace, measure our own progress, then there's really no need for us to compare what we've accomplished with someone else. Because where does that get us? It's not like if we compare, we're able to get what they get, I mean, maybe it can serve as a motivation for us to work harder and whatnot. But at the same time, if we just focus on our own growth, then in that moment we'll just be happy with what we have and just feel gratified, like and accomplished in our own strengths. Yeah, so with that, we've come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much, Sweedy, for sharing, and everyone else for participating so actively. So sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions within the hour, but fret not, because we're trying to put up content that's still relevant and can tackle some of these questions at the same time. So, of course, we hope you have learned a thing or two about imposter syndrome from Sweedy today. Amongst many other things, we talk about the triggers for imposter syndrome, as well as the different ways to cope with it. At the end of it all, it's important to recognize that people can experience imposter syndrome at different stages of their lives, and also in various forms and intensities. So be patient with yourself if you're having a difficult time. Right now, it's our turn to hear from you. Please fill out this feedback form that you see on the screen by scanning the QR code or by clicking the link in the chat. We would love to know how you found today's session. Once again, thank you so much for spending an hour of your day with us, and have a great evening. Thank you, Sweety.